Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. This week, the March of the Awesome Scandinavian Directors continues. Lucky all of you, lucky us. It is the number 2 in a series of 2, and honestly, the movies back-to-back would be a fine double feature for you to take in, so think about that. My co-host on this week's episode is Eskil Vogt, whose new movie, The Innocents, is in theaters and on streaming services right now. There is a coming-of-age thread that runs through a lot of Vogt's work, so it's appropriate that the first character he felt seen by is Anthony Michael Hall's Brian Johnson in The Breakfast Club. And then, moving along down the line, later we will talk about a character who came of age a little bit later in their life on screen, and that is Julie in Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir films, Part 1 and Part 2. Honor Swinton Byrne is the star of that, and if you're going to be Tilda Swinton's daughter, you better be able to hold it down on screen, and guess what? Honor does that. Then before I go, I'll have one quick thing to say about the movie Men, the new A24, existentially terrify you movie from writer and director Alex Garland. But for right now, let's get on with the show. I am joined by another all hits, no skips person here on the Feeling Seen podcast. As a screenwriter, you might know him from his work with the sort of famous, sort of extremely accomplished Joachim Trier. You might know the incredible, definitive coming-of-age sci-fi film Thelma, one of my favorite movies ever. You might know him from the extremely buzzed about, extremely lauded The Worst Person in the World from last year. He is also a director, which you might have seen his film Blind, and I am hoping you get ready for the extremely unnerving, written and directed by Eskil Vogt, The Innocents. Eskil, is that a fine introduction for you, or what else can we tell the people to get them set up about the work that you bring to the table today?
That's a wonderful introduction. I'm glad you're a Thelma fan.
Oh my God. That movie is one of the great, queer genre films. It's a rare queer superhero origin story is what it is. It's so beautiful. That performance by Eilidh Harbo is so moving. It's a wonderful film. Yeah, big fan.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you, honestly. And I feel like there is your new movie, The Innocents. I feel like there's a bit of an invisible string that I feel like connects the two of these movies. Innocence feels like a fascinating successor to Thelma in sort of the order of operations of you as a creative. And I wanted to hear from you about, we will get to the conceit of the podcast certainly, but I wanted to start out by talking about the current work and talking about the youth track, the coming of age track, and the imbuing the rawness of that time in our lives with a supernatural essence that isn't hit you over the head like sort of Doctor Strange and the madness of the multiverse big, but is something that just sort of permeates the fabric of the screen, and you sort of feel it in every little pixel, and it kind of overwhelms you.
Well, thank you. It's interesting how coming of age can just now become every movie is coming of age, yeah. Even if it's because
you're right.
My Innocence is about childhood. It's kind of coming of age, and Thelma is more about growing up and from your teens to your 20s in a way, and that's coming of age. And Worst Person in the World is about a woman turning 30 and it's still coming of
yes.
age. And I guess everyone is still just working on that. We're going to come of age once, We're just, I'm getting close. But it is, The Innocents is linked to Thelma, and also in a very practical way. When Joachim and I, when we were brainstorming, we wanted to do something more genre. We want to use that kind of visual, visceral movie language, and we were exploring different ideas. I came up with the idea that was sort of the idea of The Innocents. It's what if a group of kids were playing together, and while they were doing that, something magical, inexplicable happened, and they would just go along with it like it was not a big deal.
Right.
And then they would go home and sit down at dinner table, and that magic wouldn't be there anymore. And you would think that was their imagination. And I said to Joachim, what if that magic was real? If that magic of childhood really existed? And that was just one of the ideas that we were presenting to each other. And that's how we work. We throw ideas. And if they don't stick on the other person, they just fall to the ground and we move on. And Joachim wasn't the father at the time. Maybe that was I was and he wasn't. So maybe that's why that idea kept coming back to me. So at one point I felt, this is something I could work with. And that magic of childhood became, of course, they have to have some powers. And if kids have powers, something's bad's going to happen. Kids shouldn't have powers. And of course, that became more of a moral tale of how you come of age morally, where you're born with your father and mother's values. You're like that's your first set of morals. It's like your mom says don't do that, father says always say thank you, and you can't go through life, obviously, and you can't come of age if that's if you just when you're 30, you can't say I can't do that because mom says I can't.
Right, you lost that.
At one point, you have
it's on you.
Yeah. It's on you now, and you have to find your own set of values. And I think one of the reasons why there's so many stories about kids doing the wrong thing or being cruel to other kids or animals, is that you need to do some of the stuff your mom told you not to do, and then does it feel wrong? Do I feel guilty? And that became part of my story and the coming of age of my story.
I feel like you have like a coming of age trilogy now that is the innocence into Thelma into the worst person in the world, the Eskil Vogt coming of age trilogy.
Coming of age story, and next it will be about a 70-year-old man still struggling to come of age.
Do you find that you have yet stopped coming of age, or did fatherhood inject a new coming of age into your life because you had to cross that threshold and sort of attempt mastery at this very important discipline in your life?
When you become a father, instead of you don't become a master, just learn that you are completely a failure as a person. It's you're confronted with your shortcomings every day, and you can't hide from them.
That does seem like the friends who I have who are parents, like there's the joy, and yes, there's also a unifying experience of becoming aware of all of any failure you might have.
You can't hide them. They're there, and we're joking about never coming of age, but I find one of the big lies or myths about life is that when you are a kid, you think that the adults have it all figured out, and when you are an adolescent, you think, soon I'll pass that threshold. And I'll be fine. I won't be this chaotic mess anymore.
I remember thinking when I was in middle school, it was 24. It was 24 years old. Was that like, oh my God, that's like so adult? Because I think that's like around the age probably my teachers were. Like they were out of school. Yeah. They had done internships. They were now full-time teachers. They were probably 24, 25. So that was to me like, that's when it was all figured out.
But you don't have it figured out. You're as lost at 45 as you were at 25 as you were at 5. So that's the thing you learn, is that you just have to cope with that. You have to deal with uncertainty and insecurities and whatever. There's some great stuff about getting older and not caring that much what other people think, which is just like, that's a good thing, but you're still learning.
Speaking of coming of age, this is, I think, a very appropriate track to get onto to get into the central question of the podcast, which is the characters that you have brought as points of identification for you in film, and very much coming of age stories. In one of them, a generational text, and then another, a new film, a tender and gorgeous drama. And who are the characters that you have brought for us to discuss today?
Well, I brought The Breakfast Club, and since I had to choose a character, of course, it's Anthony Michael Hall's character.
I believe it's Brian Johnson.
Yeah, and in some of the John Hughes movies, I rewatched 16 Candles with my kids. His character name in the credits is called the Geek or the Nerd.
Right, yeah.
Which is kind of violent because I think in 16 Candles, his character has a name. Mm-hmm. They refer to him as Paul, or I can't remember, but in the credits, he's the geek. Yeah.
Now, are they all listed without names? Where they're the geek, the jock,
not just him.
Just him. He's just the geek. Oh, brutal.
No, I think like Joan Cusack is the geeky girl or something like that. But it's not John Hughes' best movie. I was kind of disappointed revisiting 16 Candles. It hasn't aged as well as The Breakfast Club has. I think, but yeah, I guess Anthony Michael Hall's character is still kind of the geek, the nerd in Breakfast Club. Yeah. But what I love about the Breakfast Club, and that's why I chose it, is that I always love movies since I was a kid. But for me, it was more about an escape than like a reflection of my life. And even the Breakfast Club was. I saw it. I was probably 11.
Yeah, probably
something
same.
like that. And I saw it, and I thought, I wish I had these problems. That looks so cool to have these complicated issues and to navigate that. I always wanted to be people in movies more than I felt they saw me. But I felt it was something really fresh about the Breakfast Club for me, that that was a movie that took the young characters so seriously. Their dilemmas, their emotions, their feelings, the frustrations with the parents, they never make fun of it. They take it very seriously, and it's a real well-written text about being young, and they all get their moment of explaining different pressures they're under and how and it feels very real. So that's maybe, I joke sometimes that Breakfast Club was my gateway drug to Birdman.
That's tremendous.
Because
them all sitting around in the library is just the seventh seal and talking to death over a game of chess.
Instead of a game of chess, it's like this. They have detention, and death is this principal, coming in with his bad wardrobe. But it's such a honest piece of work. I feel like it really tries to express the different characters, and it's much about how. The old generation don't understand what the kids are going through.
Is this the first time or the last time we do this?
Last.
Well, get in there and use the time to your advantage.
Mom, we're not supposed to study. We just have to sit there and do nothing.
Well, mister, you figure out a way to study.
Yeah.
Well, go!
And I feel it's like John Hughes has a cameo as Anthony Michael Hall's father.
Right, yeah.
I think picking him up. And you just see these people and you feel, they don't know who their children are. And that's something I even explore in my movie, The Innocents.
That's exactly what I was going to ask about, was how, because it seems like you give that gravity to that age of that age of experience. And I wanted to know when you started feeling like that was a priority for you. And even though she's like about 30 in Worst Person in the World, there's that whole conversation that she has with Axel at like near the end, where he talks about how at a certain point he just stopped trying and he goes back to the comfort movies and the comfort stories. And granted, he's in a very critical situation in his life, but I wanted to talk to you about when that became something that was sort of very pressing for you to factor into your own creative work, to treat the lives of the young like something so serious and like something that isn't just sort of like reckless without consideration or isn't flippant and superficial, but to really like with Innocence and with Thelma and then through into a later age stage still with Worst Person in the World, particularly with young women, to really take seriously the interiority of that struggle of being young.
I just feel that's what writers and filmmakers do. I mean, it would be so. I couldn't imagine making a movie and not be serious about my characters and their interior lives or whatever. So it's just, but I see some people do kind of do the shortcuts to get to some other good stuff because that's what they're more interested in. But I always land on the side of the characters, even if I think, I'm making a more horror kind of film, I still get back into the family drama or the kids and how they're feeling it. And I just feel the situations and the story just becomes more alive if you care about the people, if you believe that they are real people. They're not real people, obviously they're fictional, but that they feel complex and they have their idiosyncrasies and their contradictions and their aspirations, and they are aware that they're not living up to these aspirations, and that all that ambivalence makes a believable character, an interesting character, even if it's not action hero that knows what to do at every moment, So it's always important to me to just have access to a character's thoughts and feelings. That's what make a character interesting to me. And you have the US screenwriting tip of action is character. It's what a character do that defines a character. And I think sometimes not, sometimes characters don't act, or they just sit there, or they don't know. And the reasons why.
That really does feel like the split between American and European cinema, what you're describing right now. Incredible. That's incredible. No, I love hearing about this stuff.
And what I feel is my job then is to find a way to make the character's interior accessible. So that people can understand why they're not acting, or understand why they are ambivalent, and feel what the character is feeling, and not just observing this exemplary dynamic character who knows what to do in every situation, and you're just in awe or admiration, but you're not identifying in that way, or understanding or learning. So it's always been important to me. I just feel it's obvious, for me, that it has to be like that. It's not a choice. I try to work against it, I still end up with these drama situations.
I was recently reading about the original release of RoboCop, and Paul Verhoeven talked about how if RoboCop was a European movie and Murphy learned the reality of what he was, he would ponder his relationship with a god creator and have an existential wandering about who he would become. And then if it was an American movie, obviously it would be about revenge and how inherently there is a sort of fascination with looking back and the obsession with revenge and the obsession with making good versus a fascination with looking forward in the consideration of what am I now and who am I now and who will I become. And I thought that was a very interesting split. I'd never considered that sort of anchoring action and violent reaction in an attachment to the previous memory in the past, as opposed to a consideration, a thoughtfulness of what next.
That's so interesting. And when you described that, it felt like the RoboCop, European RoboCop version is Blade Runner. That's a really good point. That feels like a mixture of that European sensibility with the American genre, sci-fi style. So it's so interesting.
Wow, European RoboCop is Blade Runner. I love that. This is Thought Leadership on the Feeling Seen podcast, you guys. We are having new thoughts about cinema that is 40 years old.
I don't think anyone else have had that take on Feeling Seen before.
No,
right? That's the first time.
It's the first time here, and that's the first time I've heard it, so it's the first time in history for me. I loved what you were saying about connecting with Brian Johnson in The Breakfast Club, and the idea of romanticizing what they're dealing with and how they're dealing with it. And I wondered, was that because when you were around that age, was that kind of complicated very interesting to you, and it felt more complicated than your own life, or it felt simpler than what you were experiencing, and so you were like, if only this is all I had to worry about? What side of the split were you on with that?
I think I wasn't aware of how complicated things were. In a way, I thought I had this kind of an interesting life, so I like to project myself into movies and watch stuff that happened like on another side of the world, and watch Hollywood movies and just feel that was so much more interesting than what I was living. But I think I identify with that character also because when I was in school, elementary school, like a little bit, probably time I saw Breakfast Club, I was kind of an outsider there. I had a few friends, but we were obviously like, we were into computers and video games, and we were not the coolest kids. And then... So I think I kind of identified with like being good in school and having some sort of confidence from that, right. But thinking that was also not that important, So you kind of navigating all those things, and then in high school I was in this very nerdy class, so I had like a blast. we just and then it was when I was a little bit older, I kind of became a little bit outsider because I was in a school that hasn't that many like-minded people. But I was kind of always reading, watching movies.
Was coolness something you were self-conscious about, or were you like, coolness doesn't matter to me, but you were just aware of it?
I was aware of it, and I think I probably felt like there was something interesting happening over there that I wasn't part of, but I was very happy with what I was doing.
Okay, yeah.
It wasn't like, so it wasn't,
I'm glad.
It wasn't suffering. But I feel I identify probably with that character for that reason.
What are you babbling about?
Well, what I'd said was I'm in a math club, the Latin club, and the physics club.
Do you belong to the physics club?
That's an academic club.
So?
So academic clubs aren't the same as other kinds of clubs.
Ah, but the dorks like him, they are.
And also, I don't know if it's still like that. There's these kind of... is it true to... I mean, you've grown up in the US, these kind of archetypes of the jock and the nerd and the princess and the rebel. Is it still like that, or was it like that?
I found that the caste system in my high school was fortunately really skewed toward favoring the arts. When I was in my 4-year high school, our choir was super well regarded. Our theater department was booming. Those were the kids. The stars in those departments were also part of the student government, and they were very popular. And so I was very glad that was how kind of the priorities organized socially in my high school, but it did still compartmentalize very much down into the jocks and the nerd academics, and then as Mean Girls lays out, the sexually active band geeks and the theater kids. It did have those and I was kind of a rover. I was good at bouncing between sort of everybody. And it was in a way bouncing around to those kind of separate pods when I did. There wasn't like a factionalized friction between them. I feel really grateful for that, at least not in a way that was apparent to me. But it certainly was like there were the silos in that way. Is that not familiar to the sort of hierarchy as you experienced it when you were growing up? What's your prototypical Norwegian high school experience?
Well, it's kind of similar. It was kind of similar, but it wasn't that. I mean, but you have the sports people, of course, but it's, and I guess it's the same, like in Breakfast Club, that the sports people, the jocks have sort of access to the, like the cool people, kind of an overlap there. But it's really different. I guess the same in the US, from like inner city schools to the one in more like in the countryside,
urban versus like suburban kind of split.
Urban versus suburban thing. So I was in a kind of mid, like almost urban, like outskirts of Oslo, and there it was a mixture, and I can recognize those kind of but it wasn't like we don't have these things like prom and homecoming. So those things are just very exotic when I see it in movies. That's wow, they really do that.
Yeah,
they vote for like the homecoming.
Yeah, we have the homecoming court come out on the football field during the big homecoming game, and everybody gets the crowns and the sashes. It's really happening.
It's really happening. Yeah. So that's that wasn't part of my youth, but I still, I'm so in awe of how America can talk about its own like iconographic moments and communicate to the world, and it becomes like a reference point for everyone. So everyone has seen these movies, and when I see the names of these streets in movies, I've heard them in dialogue. I know. I look at some chain. I don't know what it is. It's called Applebee's or whatever. I don't know what it is. But I've seen the logo. I've heard it in sitcoms. American culture is just. Yeah.
I am so glad that the iconography of Applebee's has pervaded into the international consciousness. Our all-day eating establishment with reasonably priced apps and drinks. Has made it around the world. One of our great exports, the idea of Applebee's. We are going to take a quick break, but don't worry, we will be right back with Eskil Vogt.
Hi, my name is Graham Clark, and I'm one half of the podcast Stop Podcasting Yourself, a show that we've recorded for many, many years. And at the moment, instead of being in person, we're recording remotely, and you wouldn't even notice. You don't even notice the lag.
That's right, Graham. And the great thing about this... Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
And you can listen to us every week on MaximumFun.org.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Did your neighbor back into your car?
Bring that case to Judge Judy.
Think the mailman might be the real father?
Give that one to Judge Mathis.
But does your mom want you to flush her ashes down the toilet at Disney World when she passes away?
Now that's my jurisdiction. Welcome to the court of Judge John Hodgman, where the people are real, the disputes are real, and the stakes are often unusual.
If I got arrested for dumping your ashes in the Jungle Cruise, it would be an honor.
I don't want to be part of somebody getting a super yacht.
I don't know at what point you want to go into this, but we've had a worm bin before.
Available free right now at MaximumFun.org.
Judge John Hodgman, the court of last resort when your wife won't stop pretending to be a cat and knocking the clean laundry over.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. My co-host is Eskil Vogt. His new movie, The Innocents, asks the question, what if kids had superpowers? And the resulting film is a true thriller. Let's get back to our conversation. I read an interview that I think you did around Blind when that movie was coming out, and you talked about that movie having suspense elements and wanting to lean more into that, but saying like something in more like the Hitchcockian vein and how it worked with suspense, but saying that you didn't think you could make a pure thriller at the time. You were like, I don't think I have that in me. And having watched The Innocents, I think you are deeply wrong about that. And I was just coming out of my skin the entire time. And it's not, guys, because this movie has like, there's anvils falling out of the sky and people are stabbing each other left and right. Not all the time. But there's such a sense of dread that eclipses every single second of this movie. And while Americans are very brash and at times vulgar about violence in our movies, there are things that international cinema dares to do that we kind of are like, oh, no, you can't do that. Like, that's a little bit far. In The Innocents, I was like, I know I'm not watching an American film because there is a tangibleness and an understatedness to this horrifying violence that we would just hit the gas and light a house on fire instead. And there's something a bit more safe and a distance to it when the house catches fire because it's so big and overwhelming. But just a small, intimate act of violence with, very little cinematic showiness around it to highlight it. And I wanted to talk about the use of violence in your movie and how, like, the application of that in a really steady and measured way, and how you sort of think about deploying violence in your films.
Well, that's a very interesting subject, I think, because I was very conscious about exactly what you're talking about, and it leads back to my experience of movies. I can see like an extreme act of violence, someone shooting someone in the head with a shotgun, and I feel nothing.
Right.
Because how can I relate to that?
Yeah.
I have no memories of any physical pain I've experienced that I can project into that moment. So it becomes more like a splatter fun moment, or like just a disgusting, I don't want to see this moment, but it's not something that affects me.
Yeah.
But I can see someone having a hammer and hitting someone's finger, and I'll feel it in my whole body. I will just I know that pain. I'm familiar with that pain. It just affects me completely.
It's like when you watch someone get a paper cut and you're like, oh, you just feel your whole body tingle.
It's much, much more impactful than the more extravagant violence, which is weird. So I was thinking about that in my movie, and that goes also for like the effects. The VFX in the movie, there are quite a few of them, but they're very subtle in a way, hopefully, and also the violence, trying to keep it on that level where you feel it in your own body, because it's not that extravagant, but it's violent sometimes. But compared to a normal scary movie, the violence is almost non-existent, but people are very, very affected by it. So that's even like a splinter in the thigh that happens in my movie.
God.
I heard a friend of mine watched the movie in a regular theater, and he thought his friend had fallen asleep, but he had fainted from a grown man. From seeing a splinter.
He's really underselling splinter, you guys. This is a chunk of wood the size of my pinky in a child's body that is sticking partially out.
In the thigh, in the flesh of the thigh. Come on here, Jordan. Don't be
a child. Well, I know we're approaching the end, but you presented a second character too, and in the track of coming of age, I wanted to make sure that we got to this because I feel like we're sort of traveling on an age arc here. And you mentioned also the character of Julie from the Souvenir films, part 1 and 2, by writer and director Joanna Hogg. The story of a young woman, film student. It's her journey to becoming a filmmaker, but the predominant story in part 1 is her relationship with I believe the summary of the film says a very complicated man, and that is not selling you on the details. And then the second part of it is her journey making a film, processing the life she shared with this person and how that ended. And I'm a sucker for a movie about people making movies. I'm a sucker for at least industry adjacent kind of story. And what we have here, too, is another coming-of-age story. And like so many that you've written, a coming-of-age story about a young woman. And I wanted to hear about what about Julie speaks to you as somebody who, this is coming this is iterations after The Breakfast Club and the age of Brian Johnson and that. And now we're at a young person trying to become a filmmaker, struggling with the interpersonal relationships in their life. Where are you in Julie? Or where aren't you? Could be pretty comprehensive.
When I thought about this podcast and characters that made me feel seen, I was thinking, like, I was digging in that, like, growing up and the first time, and then suddenly popped up the last time I really felt seen in a movie was when I watched the Souvenir Part 2 that just came out in Norway. And I never seen anything capture that feeling of being a film student, of being in film school. It's such a particular experience. It's such a weird thing if you haven't done it. Probably like every art school has some of the same thing, that you're you're all there working together. And at the same time, you're all competitors in a way.
Yeah.
So you're helping each other and supporting each other. But at the same time, you look over, oh, she seems so self-assured and she knows what she's doing. I don't know. And you feel all these things. And I feel it just perfectly captures that. And it has so much to say about that. And I had this, I went to film school in Paris and I went back there like a week after I saw the Souvenir Part 2 to present my movie at the film school. And I hadn't been there since the movie came out. And I suddenly was walking through these places that hadn't really changed, but it's been over 10 years since I came. I had been there. And I saw some familiar faces working there. And I saw that, it was screening in a screening room where we had done a lot of stuff at film school. And it just, I was just completely knocked out about that two-punch combination of the Souvenir Part 2 and then going back to film school. It was just incredible because I really identified with Julie in that lostness of being ambitious about wanting to make movies and what you want to make it about, and you people don't getting it. You know, it's hard because in the beginning of the Souvenir, she wants to make socially conscious movies.
Yeah, about like the men on the docks.
Yeah, men on the docks, and she's obviously like...
she's posh.
She's posh, you know, like really posh. You know, that's like the British posh.
Yeah, like her professor, I think, even makes that comment at one point. He's like, well, you know...
It's quite irregular, really, to be coming and talking about a project and equipment when you haven't even thought about the budget. But I don't suppose you really have to think about budget in Knightsbridge, do you?
Like, and she just, like, really, like, laser low.
Yeah, and she keeps asking her mother, you know, about getting more money to pay for stuff, and you just feel like she's conflicted about that. And I mean, I'm not from that kind of background, but of course, I'm like in a global scale, I'm privileged. You know, so I identify with that, and also. When she meets this complicated man that Tom Burke plays, and he says, you know, why don't you make a story about people like us? You know, no, I want to make about real people. Aren't we real people?
Why are they more real than me?
They're not more real than you.
Am I more real than you?
No. I think we're all equal in that. I think we're all as real as each other. There's no competition. It doesn't matter that they're not real people. I mean, I'm not trying to make a documentary. I'm making a feature.
Now, are you
film.
sure?
Yes, I am. I'm making a feature film.
You're not trying to document some received idea of life up there on the docks, the daily grind.
And he challenges her in all that. And at the same time, I remember my first movie that I wrote with Joachim Trier called Reprise. And there's one of the dilemmas is that one character wants to be a writer and he feels he has experienced nothing.
Right,
you know?
yeah.
At the same time, his best friend has had a psychotic incident and been committed, and he comes out, and it's very complicated. But the character doesn't understand that this is real life experience right there, you know. But you don't understand it because you're going through it. You just feel, no, my parents are like they're middle class, so I'm middle class. I don't have like real suffering. I don't have a story, but there are real stories. There are suffering around, and he doesn't get it during that movie. And I feel that's what happened to me in a way, because I had like a lot of people around me having issues and suicides and all that, and so you are going through a lot, right? Yeah. You know, you are living and you experience loss, and you need to find a way to make that part of your art and express that. And I feel the Souvenir Part 1 and 2 is such a beautiful expression of that. And I really identify with Jewel. And I feel that the Joanna Hogg has some really interesting perspectives on art. At the same time, she has a sense of humor about it. And she makes fun of her character, but in a caring way. And she really respects her. And she has that great character that Richard.
I was going to ask you about the Richard Ayoade character.
Joanna Hogg went to the National Film and Television School in London, which is the same school that Joachim went to some years later. And I was hanging around there a lot, helping him with some short films. So I know that place. And I know that Julian Temple was probably the basis for that character, he did some musicals and he was happening at the time that probably she didn't feel that she had any direction. I'm just speculating here. I don't know Joanna Hogg at all. But the fact that when they meet in the street and he says,
"How's your memorial?"
Finished. No. Edit. It's done. So, we're waiting to graduate. So we'll see.
Did you avoid the temptation to be obvious?
I think so.
That's all you can hope for, isn't it?
Did you resist the temptation of being obvious? You can't do anything more, can you?
Yeah.
And I think that's such a. I mean, he didn't bother to see the movie. I think he just. I don't think so. But he's kind of a superficial character. But that's so true. You know, that's what you have to do as an artist. You just have to try not to be obvious. You have to try to express yourself and not do it in that obvious way. And that's all you can do. What
a kind of perfect slice of time it seems like to have experienced like the Souvenir Part 2 specifically, like out of film school haven't gone back to it for about 10 years. You've had very impressive success since that time. And then this movie comes along that feels so resonant in this character you're watching. Was it in a way did you feel like you had distance from the acuteness of that feeling and sensation of being there? And so it was like looking back in a sort of scrapbook sense? Or did it still feel immediate to you? That sense of sort of lostness in the context of like finding your filmmaking voice and what was important to you? Was it like a remembrance and, oh, look at that? Or was it like oh man, my heart still, I feel the flutter even now of that sensation?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think what surprised me was that it still felt like that, that it didn't just feel like looking back. It's and when I say 10 years, it's just because I won't admit that it's probably closer to 15. I still feel like I'm in film school.
Okay.
And so I identify. Every time I do a talk at a film school or talk to film students, I identify with them. And I notice that they look at me like someone who's been in the business a long time and they think I have all the answers or whatever. And of course I don't. And I feel like them. And and Joanna Hogg's movie reminded me that, okay, there's some aspects of that experience that I feel lucky I'm not part of anymore, because it's a very weird time to be locked in with these ambitious people in the film school and all that kind of competition that goes on, even though you don't want to admit it and whatever. I'm glad to not be in the midst of that. And that's kind of a memory. But that person I was and what I wanted to do, and I mean, it's not that far removed from me. I still feel that.
That is fascinating. I'm really grateful for you sharing that bit about like feeling the immediacy still of that sort of wandering feeling, that sensation of being in film school and sort of grasping at what the way is. And I wanted to ask you about the conversation with Eskil in Worst Person in the World when he talks about retreating into his favorites for comfort and not investigating new possibility and literature and art because he just wants to retreat into the things that make him feel good. And I wanted to hear about that tension between going back to favorites in your life as a creative versus the process of continuing to discover, when I think it is our natural tendency as anybody as we get older is to go back to our greatest hits. You know who you are and you're getting to know who you are all the time, but you want to be curious, but you want to be set in yourself. Like, I wanted to hear about that.
It goes in waves. Luckily, because I don't want. I mean, it would be sad if I just sat around watching Breakfast Club all day. But sometimes you just feel like that, like the comfort food, like Dog Day Afternoon in that he mentions in The Worst Person in the World, or like those 70s cinema. Go back there, you know it's good.
Yeah, you know it's good.
It's good on every level. It's like the mixture of the European and the US thing that happened at that time. It's just perfect, And so you can just go there and be happy, and you won't be disappointed. But sometimes you just feel, no, I need to. I mean, I want to know what's happening.
Yeah.
I want to see new stuff. I want to be challenged. I want to be bored. I want to see something that I've never seen before. Yeah. And luckily, I still have that when it comes to movies. Good. I watch a lot of new stuff, and I love that. And I watch all genres. I watch mainstream. I watch the Marvel and the DC. I watch the weird horror movies. I watch the indie movies.
I'm thrilled to hear that. I'm thrilled to hear that.
So I love that. That's a pleasure, for me. But since I had kids and since I'm working that much, I discover less new music than I used to. So it's like it's harder to keep up to date about everything. So you kind of choose your battles where you are cutting edge, and it just happens. It just happens. I feel like when you have kids, you can still live the life you used to live. You still do the stuff you love, but the stuff you kind of liked, you won't do anymore. That's the thing. Yeah, you have different priorities,
right? Yeah,
and so I don't go to any concerts anymore.
Okay.
I used to, So you cut back on some stuff. I hope it comes back. And I hope I'll be as hungry for cutting edge new music that I was when I was just 10 years younger, But movies, definitely. I love movies, and I watch so much of it, and I watch a lot of television series as well, but that are hyped, but doesn't give me as much as a good film. Sorry.
No, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you 100%. And whenever I see a show that's hyped about and I go to check it out, I'm like, why does everything have to be a show? Why can't it be a movie?
Because they're so long. People that just checked it out and okay, do I have 10 hours to put into this? Yeah.
Well, I will send it out on We Are Team Movies. And Eskil Vogt, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, because I loved this conversation with you, and I love your work.
Great. It was great, Jordan. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the nice words about my movie and my movies. And no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And go check out The Innocents, everyone. It will grate down to your very last nerve. And that is the best possible thing I could hope to say about it.
Thank you. No, it was a real pleasure.
One more really big thanks to Eskil Vogt. Aside from the reasons he's obviously on this podcast right now, I am such a fan of Thelma that I am starstruck having spoken to the co-writer of that film. The Innocents is showing in select theaters, but if it's not showing near you or you aren't going to theaters, you can rent it on almost any platform you choose. And again, it actually does. If you listen to the Hannah Bergholm episode talking about her film Hatching, this really is a great back-to-back of coming of age, very artful, understated horror, at times body horror. So check out The Innocents and Hatching. I think this is a nicely programmed double for you. And also, just so you know, The Breakfast Club is also currently on Hulu, and both parts of The Souvenir are available on Canopy. So you have a lot of watching homework to do, but it's going to be the good kind of homework that you wanted. It's the reading you wanted to do over the summer, okay? But as I said, as I always say, I've got one quick thing to touch on before I go, and that is the movie Men. This is a real bang-up job year that, obviously A24 is very successful, but it's really working for me personally, what we're getting from them this year with X and the upcoming movie Bodies, Bodies, Bodies coming this summer, which I have seen and I did love. And now we get Men. And excellent trailer. Definitely one of the best trailers I've seen in a very long time. And the thing I love most about the movie Men is that, A, it does a really excellent job, in my estimation, at presenting the horror of a woman being surveilled. And there have been a few films in the past couple of years that I think have done a really good job handling that very specific, terrifying aspect of the female experience. And honestly, the non-cisgender, genderqueer experience too, when you are apart from the majority, or you are apart from the sort of hegemonic dominating force, you're noticed in a crowd. And being noticed means being watched, perhaps being tracked, perhaps being menaced by people. And I think this movie, the movie Alone from, either last year or the year before, an excellent, just stripped down survival horror film. The movie Run, I think accomplishes a similar objective. Run, Alone, and this one, Men. What a trio of titles. All three do a really good job of presenting that feeling that I think most women understand, which is just existing in the world and being an object of scrutiny for no other reason than you're present. And so it does that really well. And then another thing that I really like about Men is, if you watched Annihilation, which is also from writer-director Alex Garland, who I love, if you watched Annihilation, that's some hard sci-fi. And that movie decides at a certain point that it doesn't give a shit if you are like on board for the entire journey. At a certain point, we enter a new phase of the film, and it's like, let's explore like ruminations on depression and dissociation, and you have Natalie Portman dancing with like a liquid metal double of herself. And it's like, wow, we've entered theory, haven't we? And I'll say, guys, Men it has the same spirit. At a certain point, it's like, and now we're going to hit the dense portion of this where it is extremely open to interpretation, and there's going to be some wild body horror that comes along for you to just be like, let me roll that over in my brain a little bit for a very long time and incorporate any text I may have read about like feminist thought. You can just be sort of in awe of the spectacle of how this movie escalates. That is certainly an option on the table for you. But also, if you really want to dig down in under the skin of the movie and wonder, all caps, what it all means, there's a real feast for you there. And I appreciate that Alex Garland does not seem to be afraid of alienating people. Because when you make things like sci-fi and horror, I want you to take really big swings, and I want you to, not maybe necessarily be concerned about the commercial prospects of something, and be more concerned with the sort of, how can my art be as bold and weird as possible? So that's really nice. I love that about Men. Your mileage may vary on it. It's going to be a lot for people, for a mainstream audience, but go check it out, because it's incredible performances, and it's also a beautiful looking film, because that's what Alex Garland always gives you. And now, that's our show. We did it. You can follow us on Twitter at FeelingScenePod, or send us an email at feelingscene@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm JorCrew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. The show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned. Audience supported.